Hello once again. In this little chat I'd like to talk about adventure games on the C64, among other machines. The adventure game, or text adventure game really, I don't want to talk about point and clicks, but the text adventure game in the 1980s or 70s, if you go back to the Apple II, was really the first open world computer game that you could play. This is a long time before the likes of Grand Theft Auto or any of the big third-person shooters of the 90s, long before Call of Duty. But the real open world games, these are really the prequels to those. The text adventure was probably the only game where you had free roaming. It did happen in RPGs, and there were a lot of RPGs, Ultima series among many others, but I'm not going to focus on those simply because I didn't play them. I'm doing a very selfish conversation. It's about what I know, which is, generally speaking, not a great deal. But the C64, the Spectrum, and the Amiga to a certain degree all had the best, or some of the best, text adventures you could get. A lot of them were ported from earlier machines like the original Adventure, or Cave Adventure as it was called sometimes. Were all ported to the C64 and Spectrum, BBC, Electron, Amstrad CPC, Atari 800, and so on and so forth. But the C64 was the machine that really introduced me to the text adventure. But the very first one I ever played was on the TI-99/4A, which was Starship Supernova, released by Virgin Games in 1983, or perhaps even 2, by, I think it was PJ Finkel, RJ Finkel? PJ Finkel, I think. I played it as a kid, and I've never seen it since. If anybody's got it out there in the big wide world, I'd really like to play it again. I think I'd disassemble it and port it to another machine. But anyway, Starship Supernova was my first introduction to a text adventure. And what struck me as a kid was basically how poor the graphics were in games as a rule. Not always, but as a rule. But how wonderful a text adventure was. The text adventure was the first time I'd ever played a game and it scared me. And that was playing Sherlock, I think, late at night when I was babysitting, and it was describing a body in an alleyway or a bedroom or some dark, dingy place. And that did scare me. I'd never seen that before in a game. Now the game I played most, and we played every weekend for quite a number of months, was The Hobbit. Me and my brother would sit down and play this most Friday evenings, and we never got very far. We didn't know the story of the Hobbit, didn't know anything about Tolkien really. Lord of the Rings meant nothing. No films in those days. This was 1983, 4, or even been 85. So we just played it as we went along. Didn't know who the characters were really. We had no insight into the game. In fact, it was probably a pirate game, so I'd never even had any instructions. Now, Lord of the Rings came with the book. I'm not sure if The Hobbit came with a book. I don't think it did. But The Hobbit was quite a spectacular game. Melbourne House, 1982, I believe. And it was incredible for its time. It had graphics. It had a good parser. You could pick something up and throw it with force, or hit something hard, or do something in some aggressive fashion, or whatever. You could tie words together to make a legible sentence, which had never been seen before. Now, much later games, much more complicated games, on the Amiga and bigger machines, could have a complicated parser. The PC could have a parser as big as you like. But these basic machines, like the 64, only came with 64k of RAM. So they had a very small amount of memory, and with that you had to get, in this case, a picture, some music, the text parser, and the story in 64k, which is quite remarkable if you think about it. But back to The Hobbit. It was remarkable. Now I don't know if you've played it, but if you haven't, you should, because it really gives you a good story, it entices you, it draws you in to the game itself. It's very, very good. But moving on from The Hobbit, you have things like The Leather Goddess of Phobos, Planetfall, Zork. The Zork series is fantastic. Now Zork 1 I played more than any other, simply because that's all I had at the time. But a later edition, which was a budget game I seem to remember, was Rigel's Revenge on the C64, which was also a text adventure with limited graphics. And they had occasional screens. I don't think it had as many as The Hobbit. But it was a budget game. It was $1.99 or $2.99. Don't remember who made it. Could have been Bulldog, Bullfrog, Bull something. But it was very good, and it captured my imagination at that time. It could have even been a Mastertronic game. I don't know. But Rigel's Revenge was particularly good. And all these games implanted in my mind the impression of size, depth of the game. It really created a world that you couldn't do with a Manic Miner or a Jet Set Willy, or take your pick of any. The platformer was king on the 8-bit machines. You had some flight simulators, you had some sports games, you had golf, your winter games, your football, your 10-pin bowling. But none of them were open world in a way that an adventure game was. The RPG was the closest thing. You could, generally speaking, go anywhere in an RPG, as you could with a text adventure. But these were the only format of games that could really do that. They were very, very good. Sadly now they're forgotten. Very little work is done on modern text adventures. People won't play them. It's a shame, because I think if they did an iPad or an Android version of some of the better games as a text adventure, it could be interesting. Even if it had pre-selected sentences, so you could sort of whiz through the game a little bit more quickly, because people have no patience now. But it would be very good. But the text adventure was really a sign of the times for the 80s. In the 90s we still had text adventures. We had the Pawn on the Amiga and ST, Guild of Thieves, and many others, which had much better graphics. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to the parser and the actual text that's displayed on screen. If it immerses you in a world, takes you away from where you are, then it's fantastic. Very much like a book, it is superb. Nothing can beat your imagination. I don't care how good your 3D graphics are, they are nowhere as good as your imagination. And only really a text adventure could create the imagination, could stimulate the imagination. If you look at the Hobbit screen here, for example, nice. It's a round room, or a comfortable round tunnel-like hall, with a perfectly round green door like a porthole. The walls are panelled, not pummeled. The floors are tiled and carpeted, and there is a number of polished chairs around the walls. To the east there is a round green door. You can see Gandalf. Gandalf is carrying a curious map. Thorin, the wooden chest. Gandalf gives you the curious map. Thorin, rising to his feet, says, "Well, Mr. Beggings, all is ready for our adventure." So there you go. That's the beginning of The Hobbit, and it's very typical of the text adventures of the time. Usually you start outside a house, as in Zork, or in your apartment like Hampstead, and you have some task to achieve, regardless of what it is. But it's all down to your imagination. The only grumble with text adventures, as I said before, was the parser. Some parsers were particularly good, like The Hobbit. Some were dreadful. And if you had an adventure game with a poor parser, you will get stuck at the simplest task. Opening a door. Open door. Door cannot be opened. Unlock door. Sorry, I don't know what you mean. Or various things like that. And it quickly becomes a pain in the neck. Turn it off and never play it again. Now the story might be fantastic, but if the parser is poor, you won't play it. The Hobbit, like I said before, is very, very good. So if you haven't